together and allowing God to really lead us into a whole new kind of way of life and allowing him to really speak into who we are in a way perhaps that we've never really let him. And you see, as a culture, as a people, we have these moments. We have these moments just in life where people who are a little further ahead, we love to kind of turn around and we love to like sarcastically and jokingly tell people what they kind of get to look forward to, right? And you know, we kind of, you know, when we reach our young adult years or our adult years, we look around at like students or young adults say, oh, you know, look forward to adulthood with the wonderful responsibilities and the bills and rent and mortgage and car payments and all this stuff. Like, you know, look forward to that. And when people get married, we jokingly say, you know, hey, look forward to kids and the diapers and just look forward to the toddler years. They're just amazing, right? Who knew that handing your child the wrong sippy cup would cause such a meltdown and would be just the world has come to an end, right? People later in life, they say, hey, look forward to when you're in your 30s or 40s, your metabolism begins to slow down, right? And you can't really eat all the things that you want, or wait till you're later in life and your back just hurts all of the time, and your knees, they make these sounds when you just stand up, right? Like look forward to when your body lets you know with clear sounds that you're old, right? Just look forward to those days. And so I share all that because I've kind of in my life I've hit this milestone, right? I've hit kind of one of those tiers the last couple of months. I've started to realize that almost every evening after dinner, I need to eat some Tums, right? I'm not trying to brag, right? I'm not trying to brag, right? But most evenings after we have pizza for dinner or pasta or anything like that of that nature, I have to go right to the bathroom to get some Tums out of the medicine cabinet just so I can try to enjoy a peaceful evening and watch a movie with my wife or our kids or even just go to sleep, right? And I've kind of become convinced that all kind of Tums taste the same, right? Even when you buy the beautiful little colored ones that are like all these like delicious flavors, they're like, oh, it's like candy, right? You know? They all taste the same, right? Maybe I'm crazy. Maybe you've eaten them a lot longer than I have, and you can let me know. But and even now, the last few months, right? I've reached that milestone, right? Or I don't know if it's really something to celebrate, but sort of realize too that it's okay. You know, hey, if I eat something that I know is not going to make me feel degraded, okay, hey, there are Tums on the other side, not a big deal. Easy fix, easy resolution, easy. As our 6-year-old boy loves to say over and over again, you know, it's easy peasy, lemon squeezy, you know, just easy to take care of. And you see, we have these things kind of in our life that we kind of let in, right? This food even that we eat or some things that are not good for us, we eat them and we know that there's easy ways to fix how they make us feel. But you see, there are some parts of our life that we really allow to let in that are not very easy to fix, are they? They don't really have Tums or Tylenol to help. You see, and Paul kind of gets us there in that moment as we've been in this kind of book of Romans and discovering where in chapter 8, Paul tells us to live by the Spirit, and then we kind of discover that we live by the Spirit when we love the Lord our God with all of our heart, our mind, and our soul. We love our neighbor as ourselves, and that's what it means. It looks like it's a simple, not rocket science kind of reality of walking in line and walking in the Spirit and walking in the presence of God. And last week we talked about loving God with our heart, as Paul leans into in Romans chapter 10. And in Romans 12, Paul begins to say this in the first couple of verses. He says this, he says, "Therefore I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship." And then he writes, "Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will." See, there's this reality that our minds are quite powerful, aren't they? I mean, we're in a day and age where people are kind of fascinated by what ChatGPT can do, and we're fascinated by AI and robotics and all these things that are kind of coming, you know, out that we see that's so amazing. But you see, this reality is that the human mind has created, developed, and built all of these things. And you see, very much unlike our stomachs, where there's an easy remedy to take care of and to get rid of the acid buildup or whatever it is. Unlike that easy remedy, see, when our mind absorbs things in the world around us, it is not so easy to take care of, and we know this. You see, we have a very serious problem, both in our individual life and as a people, as humanity, is that we really allow bad stuff to come into our minds, and we kind of expect them to have no impact on us or our life, but it does, but they very much do. They do. We see things that we cannot unsee. We hear things that we want to try to forget, but we can't unhear. We scroll through social media and we compare our life to other people and what we don't have and what we don't have and what we want and what we feel like we're missing. And we see these reality TV shows that we laugh about in one hand, but on the other hand, our hearts kind of long for something that appears to look real or enjoyable or good. In our culture, we have movies and shows and even books with all this content, this stuff, and these things that we absorb, we will willingly absorb, allow into our mind to be entertained or to enjoy or to learn or whatever it is. But once it's in, it can't really get out. The other day, my wife and I were cruising down the road, and for fun, we had a little ways ahead of us, so for fun, we plugged our phone into the car and pulled up Spotify and went back to some music that we loved when we were in middle school and high school, those years, and we were listening to these songs, and as we were hearing the lyrics, we were like, oh my goodness, we used to love this? Like, they were so inappropriate, right? Listen to this, I mean, I couldn't remember the names of the songs and that stuff, but we would listen to these songs, and it was like I heard them in a whole new sense of like, wow, this is what would play at our school dances? How uncomfortable would it be to be an adult on the sidelines as a chaperone watching a bunch of 8th graders dance to all this stuff? Like, that would be so crazy as these songs would sing about, sex and money and drugs and fame and all this stuff. And I mean, and we would hear these songs, and what was even more terrible is that as we would listen to these songs, it was like the lyrics were being pulled right back up out of me, and I could sing to them again, even though I haven't heard them in years, because they were there. And we are people, when we absorb things that are around us, and when they are even on repeat, they cement even further in. They get buried. And when we hear things that even we can't control, when we are told by parents that we were a mistake, man, it doesn't matter how long or how much time has passed. Those thoughts are there as if it was just yesterday. When we're told by people, by jobs, or by bosses and teachers that we will never, ever be or do anything good, man, these things, they get there, don't they? And they stay there. And man, more than we'd like to admit, they have their hand on the steering wheel of our life. And these things, they get brought into our mind, this powerful, imaginative, creative, and awfully compelling part of our body that, frankly, when they come in, they actually take us hostage in a way. Because they come in, and even though they're told to leave, and they really don't. Let things come in, and they stroke up our foolishness. They stir our insecurities. Man. And they circulates this kind of this burning passion of kind of even sin in our body. What seems so harmless begins to get magnified in our entire being. And we get to this place where our minds feel quite filthy, don't they? We feel like we're walking in sludge with anxiety, depression, or regret, or whatever it could be. There's some immense amount of stress or even insecurity. Whatever it could be is there, just like a gong going off. We feel the cloudiness of it all. But you know what I love about what Paul says there in verse 2? He uses the word renewing your minds. renewing. It means to make new. It means to make fresh again. It means to remove the stains. It means to give a deep clean. And oh my goodness, this journey of loving God with all of our mind is when will we finally get to experience that. Where the thoughts and the things that are happening inside of our head that, man, we thought would even fade away into the background over time, man, finally when we begin to love God with all of our mind, finally, we get to know what it means to have this fresh mind inside of us that isn't so easily distracted or brought to the gutter, but one that is fresh and one that is pure and right and good. And man, it seems almost like a fairy tale to even talk about it, but this journey with God is one that does this work inside of us for our entire well-being, for our mental health, the thoughts that we have that influence our actions, and then on. You see, Paul, the gentleman that God used to write the book of Romans, he writes a number of other books of the New Testament. One of my other favorite books that he writes is the book of Philippians, and he, similar to the book of Romans, where he writes Romans to the church in Rome to encourage them, lead them, and guide them, and that's shared with all of God's people. I mean, over time, I mean, the beautiful thing of history, the history of our faith and the history of Christianity, seeing how it spreads, and you see, similar to that, I mean, Paul wrote a letter to the church in this community called Philippi, a large city as well. And you see, he writes this book called what we call Philippians to encourage them. And it's much smaller. It's much smaller than Romans. And so I encourage you, in your even private devotions, I encourage you, read Philippians. It's only 4 chapters long. Read it. It's one of my favorite books of the New Testament. And you see, as he comes to the end of Philippians, he begins to write these words. I'm going to read some of them aloud, and then I'll show a verse on the screen. But he begins to write some of these words. Some of them will be familiar. He writes, "Rejoice in the Lord always. I will say it again, rejoice. Let your gentleness be evident to all. The Lord is near." We know this next verse. "Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God." Wow, we love that verse. But you know what he says next? He says this in verse 7. He says, "And the peace of God which transcends all understanding." I mean, just imagine that. I mean, he's teaching us about this peace, but you're never really going to know all of it. I mean, how bizarre is that? This peace that is so good that I'm trying to teach you about, but you'll never really know all of how great and how wondrous it is. He says, "This peace that transcends all understanding will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus." Wow. As Paul begins to write these words, he brings us back to this beautiful reality of what it means to hand our mind over to Christ. You see, those last couple of words, he says, "and your mind's in Christ." We talked about this last Sunday as we talked about our heart and prepositions and how prepositions matter. They matter. And even in the language that we use, I use the example of if I were to tell you to put the milk on top or on the refrigerator, well, we know that we have spoiled milk here pretty soon, but if you put it in the refrigerator, then we're good, right? If I say come on, even in our human context, we know come on means you're kind of following, you're coming with me. But if I say come in, our mental image completely changes as we picture ourselves at a front door, opening it, and we say come in. That our minds are in Christ. And what Paul, similar to what he was sharing to us in Romans, what he is speaking to people who are following Jesus is that we need to understand that God's peace comes when we let our minds belong to Jesus. There is no shortcut around this. There's no other way to maneuver this, because oftentimes what we do is like when we have a headache and we pop some Tylenol, or we have an upset stomach and so we pop some Tums. Understand that we can't just welcome in this idea of Jesus near to our life and expect that we can bring his peace into our life and into our mind. Imagine if you were invited to a party and you were told to bring all the soda. And so you grab like all the amazing Dr. Pepper and Coke, and you leave behind that blue bottle stuff with the circle. Yeah, you don't bother with that stuff, but you bring all the soda to the party, and imagine you show up at the front door, and people open the door, and they're excited that you're there, but then they just grab the 2 liters out of your hand, and they just shut the door in your face. They didn't really want you at the party. They just wanted you to bring something to the party. We just want Jesus to kind of come in to moments of our life where we feel very overwhelmed, where we feel like we're spiraling even. And we just want to have Jesus come and show up and say, all right, give me your peace, give me this. But understand is that there's so much hostility, anxiety, all these things raging around in our mind because we never really welcome in the Prince of Peace and allow him to make his home in our mind, that it is no longer ours, but it is his. It is his. I remember years ago talking with a friend, someone who was walking. He kind of grew up believing in God. He kind of grew up around church, and he kind of knew the VeggieTales shows and all that stuff, right? And I remember talking about walking in relationship with Jesus, and we were talking about this very thing of allowing our mind to not be our own, but for it to belong to God. And he said, there's no way that God would really want this mind of mine with its thoughts, with my thoughts that are so dark, that are so messy and so broken. There's no way that Jesus, when I would invite him into the house, I mean, it's like if Jesus were to walk in, peek around, like, I'm good, like, I'm leaving. He just has this sense of, man, my mind is such a mess. There is no way that God would want anything to do with it. And there in that moment, I just simply would go to ask him, do you think God knows your thoughts? Like, well, yeah, I mean, he does, yeah. Do you think that he is surprised by your thoughts? You see, because we often forget that the Lord knows what today in my mind, in my life looks like. And he knew this all the way back when he first welcomed me into his arms. And he knew what today would look like for me. And even my highs and even my lows. And he's not surprised. And we even forget that when we are walking with Christ and he calls us to things, he calls us and wants to use us, and he begins to use us in ways, we reach these parts of our life where we even also begin to feel guilty. We feel guilty because we feel like we should be further along. We feel like the same mental traps we should not be falling into, but we do. But we forget that all the way back when God began to bring us along, he was not going to be surprised at the hurdles and hills and mountains and the valleys that were to come. You see, this is this beautiful reality, is that God knows very much all the stains of our mind, the things that have been said to us, the things that we even have allowed to be absorbed right on in willingly. And he is up for the job of walking this journey and renewing it. Isn't that great news? This path of freedom. Understand that loving God in your mind isn't just learning more information. It's letting our mind and its contents, all of it, belong to Jesus. That way he can pull up his big old rubber glove sleeves and get on his hands and knees and begin to do this work inside of us and this journey with us that changes everything. You see, why it's so important for us to begin this, because understand, like I've been saying, our mind absorbs all that's around it, and understand that when our mind lets things in, it is magnified then by our heart, and it is magnified in our soul. Understand that. Our mind is just kind of a memory bank. It's kind of just the decision maker. Understand that our heart magnifies things that it shouldn't magnify. as lusts or things are led in with our mind, it kind of begins to turn up the flame on them within us. And in the same way, these things that are said to us, these insecurities, these failures, whatever that echoed into our ears, our soul just magnifies them. And when we learn to allow our mind to be made new, we begin very much then to put this filter in place that leads us to really allowing God to take control and have his way. You see, I love what Paul says next. He says this in Philippians 4, verse 8. He says, finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. Wow. Think about such things. Understand that we have got to be people, as we're walking with Jesus, we have got to be people who set up guardrails to filter what your mind takes in. We have got to, and I've used this many times, this imagery of guardrails, because understand, we often use like words like boundaries or fences, and in that kind of nature, we put them up to keep what is on the outside from getting in. But oftentimes we can't really control what gets in. And so I love this imagery of guardrails because we put them up knowing that if we get a little out of line, that the cliff will kill us. We know that if we take the curve too sharp, we'll wreck and get injured or hurt. And so we put guardrails in place to control what we can control and be extra careful about what we allow to be around us and be filtered into us into the best of that we can. We allow and look to God to do this work inside of us. And this is so important, not just for us, but for people that God has entrusted us to be responsible for. Speaking to our kids, I love seeing them how they're up in here in front, singing and dancing and clapping, and then just also sitting, and they're listening to these songs that are just washing over them. How good is that? Friends, this reality is that much of what we are exposed to in our younger years impacts us in ways that we can't even imagine over the long haul of our life. Remember, I was about 8, 9, maybe 10, but probably around 9 years old. We lived out in the country, and we had a couple neighbors around us we got to know, and we had this one lady who lived next door, and she was like our grandma. I mean, she wasn't our grandmother, but this woman, she loved RC, soda, and she loved, Tony Stewart, the NASCAR driver, and she was a great lady who was like grandma. She always had pizza rolls, right? Then so we'd go to their house just to get pizza rolls, right? Mom might feed us lunch, but then we'd walk over next door through the woods to get pizza rolls afterwards, right? And I remember one day when I was around 9 years old, some of her family members were there, and I remember she had a family member who had a garage by her house. I remember walking into the garage to say hi, and I remember for the very first time I looked up and I saw a poster of a naked woman. And I remember in that moment not knowing what I was looking at, but then it started to do something to me. And now I have not been brought into any throughout my life, thank the Lord, into any addictions to pornography, but as any man in the world with lust being this real battle that the world that we live in, I remember being so young, and even at that point in my life, this weird prying happening in my mind. Understand that we have kids in our world, homes. We have to protect their little minds because they can very easily absorb things that will hurt them in the long run. We have to be careful about what shows and music they listen to, what movies they watch and books they read, and even friends that they have who are speaking into their mind. Because understand, we love to push things off as, oh, that's just a phase, but it could be something more permanent. And you see, I love this standard, this bar of standard is something okay for my child to watch. And if it's not, then what bit of excuse do I have to watch it? Like if it's not okay for our kids aren't 10, 11, 12 years old, but if it's not okay for a 10-year-old to watch it, then my goodness, what are the excuses that I have to watch it? Is it because everybody's watching it? Oh my goodness, there are a number of shows that I've been in around coworkers and other men and talking about all these shows, and it sounds amazing, this battle, these scenes, and I'd go to watch it, and man, I get 5 minutes in and be like, I can't even watch this filth. There's so much junk in it. Aaron and I, even today, are super, super intentional about the movies that we watch, the shows that we watch. We review and watch things online. I mean, there was a day where inappropriate scenes were hardly in movies and shows, but now it's almost like a new standard that exists in a majority of them. You see, we have to ask these questions of, man, would it be appropriate for my 10-year-old, or if I had a 10-year-old, to watch this? And if not, then what is my motive for watching it, or why am I not under that rule? Why is it okay for me to watch this? And you see, we have to have these guardrails in our life that we put up, and they're not the same for everybody, but understand is that as we walk with the Holy Spirit, we say, Lord, my mind belongs to you. We say, Lord, what do you want in here? What are you okay with me taking in? And understand is that we live in a culture, we live in a world today where there's a lot of crazy ideas that are coming out of the woodworks that are shared online. I love what Paul writes this other letter to a kind of a pastor, a church leader named Titus. And he writes and he says this, and he says, and as he's speaking, he's urging the people to talk about Jesus, share Jesus with people, recognize your witness, share about the kingdom of God, right? Love people, encourage people, be there to lift people up. And then after he says all that, he says this in chapter 3 of Titus. He says, but avoid foolish controversies and genealogies and arguments and quarrels about the law, because these are unprofitable and useless. Understand, and maybe it's just the algorithm on Facebook that sends all these things my way, but understand that there's all these weird teachings about how aliens are fallen angels, and people try to use the Bible to teach this, and they say that the earth is flat, and they use the Bible to teach this, and they talk about how our brothers and sisters have been brought over from Africa, that they are the Hebrews of the Old Testament. They use the Bible to try to teach this stuff, and they kind of coax all these different worldviews and religions and faith out of them, and they even say, this is what the Bible teaches, and it doesn't. But even putting these things aside, understand, it'd be fascinating to talk about controversies and ideas and things that kind of, are kind of skeptical about, or I'm a naturally skeptic person, so talking about our society or the events of our history, any of that stuff. But understand is, does it lead us to a place of fear? You can talk about the destiny of our nation and Jesus coming back and all these things, but does it lead us to an immense place of fear that frankly ruins our life? And this is where we allow ideas to get into our mind that then control how we live. And understand that the internet has its helpful side, but man, does it have its never-ending dark side of people who are very passionate about their ideas and people who sound very convincing but are way off the truth, teaching all these things that so easily grab a hold of our mind. We never stop needing guardrails, my friends. Throughout the journey of my life, they get thicker and thicker and thicker. That's what should happen. When we are new with Jesus, our guardrails are tiny. There may be a picket fence. But understand, as we walk further and further with Jesus, they turn from picket fences to stone to metal and concrete. They become beefy and heavy, and they become not widened, but more narrow. We become more restrictive of what we allow into our life. I love what Paul writes back in Romans 3. He writes this, he says, for by the grace given me, I say to every one of you, Do not think of yourselves more highly than you ought, but rather think of yourself with sober judgment in accordance with the faith God has distributed to each of you. Understand that there's an element of this journey with Jesus that is for everybody, that is generic, that all of us walk by the same guidelines and guardrails. But there's also an element of this where we've had a unique upbringing, or we've been exposed to some things, or we've had some trauma, or we've had some addictions even, and where things get even more intense. We should not be looking for how we are exceptions, but looking to how we can make ourselves subject to letting God lead us. Understand that our mind is meant to tell our heart no. We have guardrails in place. Our heart begins to chase after a good-looking young man or a good-looking young girl, but our mind says no. That relationship is bad for us. It's unhealthy. They have red flags. They don't meet what we're looking for. Our heart begins to look after money and these things of our life and run down all these paths so uncontrollably, but our mind says no. No, this is not good for me. This is not good for my marriage, for my kids. Understand, I've heard crazy things that people following Jesus try to say is okay and embrace in their life. And they try to kind of walk around all the truths of how God wants to lead them. But understand is that when our mind belongs to Jesus, and he tells us that this is not good for us and we should not do it, he's not telling it to us to keep us from having fun. It is to keep us in freedom. That is what we've been saying since week number 1 of this whole series, is that the law and teaching of God, what Casey shared so wonderfully a number of weeks ago, is that God gave the law after they were brought into freedom in the Old Testament. The law keeps us free. It doesn't bring us back into bondage. The law keeps us free. Walking by the ways of Jesus keep us free. As Romans 12:2 said earlier, it is a pattern inside of us that God is looking to make new and change. And understand is that we have to put to practice what God teaches us. Oh my goodness. Our faith is not just this thought that exists in our minds, but is brought down and filtered into our everyday life. I love what Paul says next back in Philippians. He says, whatever you have learned or received or heard from me or seen it in me, put it into practice, and the peace of God will be with you. Oh my goodness, how this is so good. And can I tell you, understand when it comes to the way you work your job, the way you handle your finances, the way you lead your spouse or you serve your spouse or love your spouse sacrificially, the way that you raise your children, disciple your children, the way you immerse yourself in the body of Christ, the way that you love and care for people who are different from you, the way that you love people who are so stinking hard to love. We have people in our life who are hard to love, right? It's not just me. There are people around us that we see. Sometimes we see them just in passing at the supermarket, but sometimes we see them every single day, and they are a drain. They are hard to love, but understand when our mind belongs to Jesus, our whole way of viewing that person, our whole way of operating the world changes. My goodness. The way that our mind, when it belongs to Jesus, it causes us to be quick to forgive. My goodness. All these Christians, they're getting offended and holding grudges. God tells us to be quick to forgive, and this is a lesson taught into our mind that tells our heart, no, you don't get to be angry. You get to forgive and love like Jesus. Man, that's when our mind tells our heart, no, you don't get to be greedy and always anxious about money and needing more, and there's not enough in retirement. We need more. No, the mind says, no, God wants us to be generous. And when our mind tells our heart to do, then our heart finally gets in track and says, okay, that's what we're doing. Okay, it finally catches up. man, are we slow to be angry? This is what the lessons of the Bible teach us. Are we slow to be angry? And even then, is our anger even righteous? Is a lot of our anger perhaps even more unrighteous? When we see sin or we see temptation in front of us, do we run away like Joseph? Or do we pursue it like David, who saw it across the building top and then had to bring it all? I mean, you know how much time it would have taken to bring Bathsheba over from her rooftop over to his palace? And all the while, he doesn't change his mind. He allows himself to go deeper and deeper and deeper. In this season of my life, I'm saying, Lord, make me like Joseph. When temptation is right in front of me, I run the other way. Then I turn it, I run. Then I run. I don't want to be sucked into judging others or sucked into lust or sucked into image or ego or pride or any of the other things, or being angry with my wife or our children in unrighteous ways. That, Lord, I want to run the other way. Do you see people as objects that are in your way or as appointments with divine purpose? All these things that are in our mind. We live in a world full of spiritually obese people who have learned a lot but have not lived an ounce of it. And that is why over and over again Paul tells us, listen, to put to practice what God teaches you, what he teaches you. Understand that after he talks about loving God with our mind and allowing our mind to be renewed, he says this next in Romans 12. Listen to what he says next. He just talked about renewing your mind. And then he says next in verse 9 through 21, he says, and just listen to this. It's not going to be on the screen. He says, love in action. Love must be sincere. Hate what is evil. Cling to what is good. Be devoted to one another in love. Honor one another above yourselves, never lacking in zeal. Keep your spiritual fervor serving the Lord. Be joyful in hope, patient in affliction, hopeful, faithful in prayer. Share with the Lord's people who are in need. Practice hospitality. Bless those who persecute you, and bless and do not curse. Rejoice with those who rejoice, mourn with those who mourn, live in harmony with one another. Do not be proud, but be willing to associate with people of low position. Do not be conceited. Do not repay anyone evil for evil. Be careful to do what is right in the eyes of everybody. Oh my goodness, over and over again, Paul teaches throughout the section. We're going to read it in our groups this week, but he teaches over and over again, love in action, to put to practice what God is teaching us. It's our mind that chooses to do so, and our heart follows suit. But our heart catches up. Understand that when we love God with all of our mind belongs to him. We put up these guardrails in our life that he leads us to put up, that keep the junk out. That way he can have his way in our life and lead us. And we say yes. Like without even thinking about, like breathing. We don't even think about it. We just walk in obedience. And this is where the transforming power of Jesus begins to work in such small increments that lead up to so much over time. Over time. And friends, I encourage you. I don't know where you are in your journey with God, but I simply have 3 questions I just want to put in front of you. And I don't know where you are in your journey of faith, or I don't know what God is encouraging you with or convicting you lately, but I simply want to ask you a few things I want you to write down and even ponder with. I want you to ask yourself, what has Jesus been teaching you lately? Like, what has he just been trying to teach you lately? And maybe you don't know the answer to that question because you haven't been asking him. And so maybe you could ask him, say, Jesus, what do you want me to know? What am I missing in my life? What is happening on Sunday morning or in my own time in the Word? Understand, that's why it's so good for us to be in the Bible. It's because it's these deep, clean moments where the Scripture is then scrubbing at our mind and wiping away the junk and the trash that's been building up. Jesus, what are you teaching me? What am I missing? Aaron and I both in our life, we've been in a season right now where the Lord is really convicting both of us to Sabbath. Like we have time off of work, but Sabbath is not just not working. Sabbath is a time It is a day given to God to say, Lord, we need you to refresh us. And it changes on the day of the week. Lately it's been Mondays, but it's a time where we say, you know what? We're going to carve out all these things. We're going to say, Lord, this is your day. And you see, I'm a little bit of a workaholic. I love to work. My whole life growing up, I love to roll my sleeves up, get my hands dirty, and work and work and work and put on long days and then, hey, how you doing? Oh, I'm tired, but I'm fine. I love that, but being a man and all that stuff. But God has been convicting me lately that we have not been observing that in our life. And the other day, we had our kind of our Sabbath. We had our time where we were both reading from the Bible. And I read from Jeremiah chapter 17. And the entire time I thought just like, man, I just want to go do something. Like, even if it's fold laundry, I want to just prove my worth to the world. I read in Jeremiah 17, where Jeremiah says to the kings and leaders of Judah, he says, if you continue to not follow the Sabbath, then God will hand you over to your own destruction. But if you do, then he'll give you great success. And I'm like, here I am, needing to work or needing to prove my worth to the world. And right there, God drops a bomb and speaks. Great conviction. Don't you just love those moments? Friends, what has God been teaching you lately? Maybe you need to slow down so you can listen. Because he wants to encourage you. He wants to lead you. And friends, I encourage you, as he begins to say these things to you, what are then just 3 steps that you can do to move towards it? We live in a culture where we say, what's the one next thing? And that's great. But one is not enough to gain traction. One is not enough to make a noticeable difference in our obedience to implementing Sabbath in our family, in our life. Man, we don't schedule meetings, we don't check emails, and we cut out most of the day, part of the day, just to slow down, to turn off the lights in the house and just let it be quiet and allow God. We put on worship music even, and we sit and we read, and we allow God to restore us from the inside out. Man, we can get busy. We can be the Joneses and chase after the next thing. But I encourage you, I know in our own life, the Lord is telling us that. And there are things that he is speaking to you. And what are 3 things that you can begin to change and shift to move down that journey of saying yes? And I encourage you, this is the last question of who are you going to tell? Because it's nice when we kind of keep things to ourselves, right? Oh, just me and Jesus, right? But when we tell our wife is good to hold our feet to the fire, isn't she? We tell our friends, we tell people around us. Yes, they encourage, and yes, they affirm. But they also, too, get to be people who help cement in that leadership from God. And they help make those teachings from Jesus real. And then we, even in those moments, get to encourage them of how perhaps they're not hearing from God to lead them or what God is trying to teach them. Friends, this journey of faith is a beautiful one. It's not about being a student who just is a master of knowledge, a wealth of knowledge. Yes, we should read. Yes, we should learn. Yes, we should memorize and internalize. Absolutely. But what good is it? What good is it to know? If Paul made it so clear that the peace of God that comes into our mind begins to make its way to becoming real, when we finally listen, when we finally do, and we finally follow. I don't know what you've been told over your life. I don't know if you've been told that you were a mistake. I don't know if you've been told that you'll never be good at anything or you're worthless. I don't know the trash of the world that's been piled into your mind. But I tell you right now that our King wants to set you free from it. You are not who you once were, even if your own mind tries to tell you that you are. That's another way that Jesus loves to scrub the stains out. Friends, I urge urge you, love God with all of your mind. And maybe then just you'll finally be able to know what it's like to be free. For the insecurities, the voices, the distractions, the sins, the selfishness even, to be gone. And peace is finally there. You pray with me.